Part 1. The Christmas dinner that changed everything. Christmas had always been complicated in my family. From the outside, our holiday gatherings looked perfect. The house glowed with warm lights, expensive decorations filled every corner, and the dining table looked like something from a magazine. Anyone walking through the front door would have thought they were looking at the picture of a happy family. But appearances can hide a lot of things, and I had spent most of my life learning exactly how much could be hidden behind a smile. That year, the snow had started falling early in the afternoon. By the time Rosie and I arrived at my parents' house, the streets were covered in a soft white blanket. Rosie was excited. She loved Christmas, loved family gatherings, and loved hearing stories from older relatives. At 7 years old, she still believed that adults always meant well. Inside the house, the usual holiday chaos was already underway. My mother was rushing between the kitchen and dining room, making sure every dish was placed perfectly. My father stood near the head of the table, giving instructions even when nobody had asked for them. My sister Camilla sat comfortably beside her daughter, Ava, who seemed to attract praise from every person in the room. Rosie quietly took her seat next to me. She smiled politely when relatives greeted her and listened carefully to the conversations around her. She had always been observant. While other children chased toys or watched cartoons, Rosie liked listening to adults talk. She noticed details most people ignored. Dinner began normally. Plates were passed around the table, stories were shared, laughter echoed through the room. For a while, everything felt peaceful. Then Rosie asked a question. It was a simple question, an innocent question, the kind of thing a curious child would naturally ask. She leaned forward and said, "When do I get the thing great-grandma said she left so we'd always be safe?" The effect was immediate. The conversation died. Forks stopped moving. Smiles disappeared. The room became so quiet that I could hear the ticking clock in the hallway. For a moment, nobody spoke. Then my father cleared his throat and frowned. "That's a rude question," he said sharply. Rosie blinked in confusion. She looked around the table, clearly trying to understand what she had done wrong. Before she could say another word, my mother forced a laugh and quickly tried changing the subject. Camilla immediately redirected attention toward Ava, encouraging everyone to celebrate one of her recent school achievements. Within seconds, the entire room acted as though Rosie's question had never been asked. But I had noticed the reaction. More importantly, Rosie had noticed it too. Her cheeks turned red. Her shoulders lowered. And then she did something that broke my heart. She apologized. "I'm sorry," she whispered. The adults relaxed instantly. It was the response they wanted. A child accepting blame for something she didn't understand. A child making herself smaller so everyone else could remain comfortable. I placed my hand gently over hers. "No," I said quietly. Rosie looked at me. "You don't need to apologize for asking a question." The room froze again. My mother's expression hardened. My father's eyes narrowed. I could feel years of family expectations crashing into that single moment. For most of my life, I had played the role they assigned me. I had apologized first, stayed quiet, avoided conflict, smoothed over uncomfortable situations. But now it wasn't just about me. It was about my daughter. My father pointed his fork toward Rosie. "You embarrassed this family," he said. The words sounded absurd. A 7-year-old child had asked a question. Yet he spoke as if she had committed a crime. "You will apologize to everyone at this table." Rosie's eyes immediately filled with uncertainty. I squeezed her hand. "She has nothing to apologize for." My father slowly pushed his chair back and stood. The sound echoed through the room. "You don't get to decide that," he said. Actually, I did. Because I was her mother. And for the first time, I was prepared to act like it. The argument escalated quickly. My mother accused me of being disrespectful. Camilla rolled her eyes. Several relatives stared down at their plates, pretending not to hear what was happening. Nobody defended Rosie. Nobody asked if she was okay. Nobody questioned why a child was being publicly humiliated. Eventually, my father delivered his final decision. "You're both grounded." The statement was so ridiculous that I almost laughed. I was an adult woman with my own home, my own child, and my own life. Yet he spoke as though I were still a teenager living under his roof. "You'll eat alone," he continued. "Maybe then you'll learn your place." My place. The phrase hit harder than I expected, because suddenly I realized something. This wasn't about manners. It wasn't about respect. It wasn't even about Rosie. It was about control. It had always been about control. And I was finally tired of giving it to them. I stood up calmly. I helped Rosie put on her coat. I ignored the shocked expressions around the table. My father demanded that we sit back down. My mother warned me I was making a mistake. Camilla accused me of causing drama. I answered none of them. Instead, I took my daughter's hand and walked out the front door. The cold winter air hit my face the moment we stepped outside. Behind us, voices continued shouting from inside the house. But for the first time in years, those voices sounded distant. For the first time in years, I wasn't trying to earn their approval. I was protecting my child. And deep down, I knew this night was only the beginning. I didn't realize it yet, but one innocent question had just exposed a secret my family had been protecting for a very long time. The truth was coming. And when it arrived, it would change everything. Part 2, the drive home and the pattern I couldn't ignore. The drive home should have taken 15 minutes. Instead, it felt like an entire lifetime compressed into a single winter night. Snowflakes drifted through the glow of streetlights as I guided the car through quiet neighborhoods. Christmas decorations sparkled on porches and rooftops. Families gathered around dinner tables. Children opened presents. Laughter spilled from brightly lit windows. Meanwhile, my daughter sat silently in the back seat. The contrast was impossible to ignore. A few minutes earlier, she had been sitting at a holiday dinner surrounded by relatives. Now she stared out the window as if she were trying to understand something much bigger than herself. I glanced at her in the rearview mirror. She looked smaller than usual. Not physically. Emotionally. Children have a way of carrying pain quietly. They don't always scream or cry. Sometimes they simply become silent. And that silence worried me more than tears ever could. For several minutes, neither of us spoke. Then, as we stopped at a red light, Rosie finally broke the silence. "Mom." Her voice was soft. "Yeah, sweetheart. Did I do something bad?" The question hit me harder than anything my parents had said all night. A child shouldn't have to wonder whether curiosity is wrong. A child shouldn't leave a family gathering believing she deserves punishment for asking a simple question. I tightened my grip on the steering wheel. "No." She looked down at her hands. "But Grandpa said I was rude." I took a slow breath before answering. Grandpa didn't like the question. That doesn't mean the question was wrong. Rosie seemed to think about that. The car remained quiet again. Then she asked something that revealed exactly how deeply the evening had affected her. "Are we really grounded?" For a second, I almost smiled. Not because it was funny, because she was genuinely concerned. In her mind, being grounded was an official status, something powerful adults could declare and everyone else had to obey. I met her eyes in the mirror. "No, sweetheart. Adults don't get grounded." She stared at me. "Never. Never." A tiny smile appeared at the corner of her mouth. It wasn't much, but it was enough. When we finally pulled into our driveway, I felt some of the tension leave my shoulders. Home. Not my parents' house. My home. The place where nobody had to earn basic respect. The place where questions were allowed. The place where my daughter could breathe. I helped Rosie inside and hung up our coats. The familiar comfort of our small house wrapped around us immediately. The couch with the worn cushions. The books stacked beside the coffee table. The hallway nightlight Rosie insisted on keeping on. The mismatched mugs sitting beside the sink. Nothing was perfect, but everything was safe. That mattered more. I made hot chocolate while Rosie sat quietly at the kitchen table. Normally, she would have talked nonstop about Christmas gifts, funny relatives, or plans for winter break. Tonight, she simply watched the steam rise from her mug. Every few seconds, she looked at me as though waiting for another adult to tell her she had done something wrong. The realization broke my heart. Eventually, I sat beside her. "Rosie." She looked up. "You never have to apologize for asking a respectful question." She hesitated. But everybody looked mad. I know. Were they mad at me? The honest answer was complicated. But children deserve honesty. They were uncomfortable. Why? Because adults were hiding something. Because power makes people nervous. Because your question touched a secret they wanted buried. Of course, I couldn't explain all that to a 7-year-old. So I answered differently. Sometimes people get upset when they don't want to talk about something. Rosie nodded slowly. Then she whispered something that stayed with me long after she went to bed. "I say sorry a lot." The statement sounded simple, but it revealed years of conditioning. Years of learning that apologizing quickly made adults happier. Years of trying to avoid criticism before it started. Years of making herself responsible for other people's emotions. And suddenly, I saw something I had missed before. She learned that from me. Not intentionally, but she learned it. Because I had spent most of my own life doing exactly the same thing. Growing up in my family taught me a dangerous lesson. Keep the peace. Stay agreeable. Apologize quickly. Don't challenge authority. Don't ask difficult questions. Don't create conflict. And if something feels unfair, smile anyway. I had spent decades following those rules. Without realizing it, I had started teaching them to my daughter. That realization hurt. After Rosie finished her hot chocolate, I tucked her into bed. She wrapped her stuffed rabbit tightly against her chest. The room was dark except for the soft glow of the nightlight. I kissed her forehead. "You're safe," I told her. She nodded sleepily. Then, half asleep, she whispered, "Sorry." The words slipped out automatically. Like breathing. Like a reflex. Like something she had practiced 1,000 times. I brushed a strand of hair away from her face. "Not tonight," I said gently. Within minutes, she was asleep. I remained standing in the doorway long after her breathing became steady. My daughter had spent an entire evening believing she was wrong for being curious. And somehow the adults responsible for protecting her had convinced themselves they were teaching respect. No, they were teaching fear. There was a difference. A huge difference. Eventually, I walked into the kitchen and sat alone at the table. The house was silent. Outside, snow continued falling. Inside, my phone lit up. One message. Then another. Then another. "My father. You are grounded. Come back tomorrow. You will apologize." A few seconds later, my mother joined in. "You need to learn your place." The phrase again. Your place. The words made my stomach tighten. Not because they hurt. Because they sounded familiar. Too familiar. Suddenly memories began surfacing. Moments I had ignored. Moments I had excused. Moments that looked very different now. I remembered a summer barbecue several months earlier. Rosie had accidentally knocked over a cup of lemonade while running through a sprinkler. The spill took less than 5 seconds to clean up. But my mother reacted as though a disaster had occurred. "Control your child," she had snapped. Rosie apologized immediately. Meanwhile, Ava had spent the entire afternoon throwing water balloons at people. Every adult laughed. Every adult cheered. Every adult called her adorable. Same behavior. Different reaction. I remembered another birthday party. Rosie had interrupted an adult conversation because she wanted to show a drawing she had made. My father told her to wait her turn. 10 minutes later, Ava interrupted the same conversation to tell a story. Everyone listened. Everyone smiled. Everyone encouraged her. Again. Different rules. Different standards. Different children. The patterns suddenly became impossible to ignore. Rosie was expected to be careful. Ava was allowed to be confident. Rosie was corrected. Ava was celebrated. Rosie apologized. Ava received praise. For years, I had convinced myself I was imagining it. For years, I had explained it away. For years, I had chosen comfort over confrontation. Not anymore. Tonight had changed something. Tonight, my daughter had been publicly humiliated for asking a question. And nobody, not one person at that table, had defended her. I stared at my phone. More messages arrived. More demands. More accusations. More attempts to control the situation. For the first time, I didn't feel guilty. I felt clear. Because deep down, I finally understood what was happening. The family scapegoat had grown up. And now, they were trying to pass the role to her child. I leaned back in my chair and looked toward the hallway where Rosie slept peacefully. A promise formed in my mind. A simple promise. The cycle stops here. Whatever came next, whatever secrets were hiding behind that dinner table reaction, whatever battles waited ahead, my daughter would not inherit the same silence I had. Part 3. The warning great-grandma left behind. The next morning, I woke up before sunrise. For a few moments, I simply stared at the ceiling, trying to convince myself that the previous night had been an overreaction. Maybe emotions had gotten out of control. Maybe Christmas stress had made everyone behave badly. Maybe, after a few days, things would settle down and life would return to normal. But deep inside, I knew better. Normal was the problem. Normal was what had allowed the same pattern to continue for years. Normal was what had taught me to stay quiet whenever something felt wrong. And normal was what had nearly taught my daughter the same lesson. I got out of bed and walked into the kitchen. The house was still dark. My phone sat on the counter, exactly where I had left it. The screen showed 12 missed calls. Most were from my parents. A few were from Camilla. There were also several text messages. Some were angry. Some were manipulative. Some pretended to be loving. But they all carried the same message. Come back. Apologize. Accept the punishment. Pretend none of this happened. I ignored every one of them. Instead, I made coffee and sat quietly at the kitchen table. As the steam rose from the mug, another memory surfaced. A memory I hadn't thought about in months. A conversation with great-grandma Ruth. At the time, it had seemed strange. Now it felt important. The conversation had happened about 6 months earlier. Everyone else had been watching football in the living room, while Ruth and I cleaned dishes in the kitchen. She moved slowly because of her age, but her mind was sharper than anyone realized. People often made the mistake of treating her like she wasn't paying attention. They were wrong. She noticed everything. That afternoon, she had been unusually quiet. After a few minutes, she looked toward the living room to make sure nobody was listening. Then she turned on the faucet. The sound of running water filled the kitchen. Only later would I understand why. She wanted privacy. Rosie asks questions like I do, she said. I smiled. That's a good thing. It is, she replied. Then her expression changed. The warmth disappeared. What remained was concern. Real concern. The kind that doesn't appear by accident. If they ever punish her for asking questions, she said carefully, don't argue. I frowned. What do you mean? She looked directly into my eyes. You won't win by fighting in that house. The statement confused me. At the time, it sounded random. Now it sounded like a warning. I remembered drying a plate and laughing softly. Nobody is going to punish Rosie for asking questions. Ruth didn't laugh. Instead, she reached into her apron pocket. For a moment, she searched for something. Then she removed a small folded card. The card looked ordinary. A name. A phone number. Nothing more. She pressed it into my hand. Keep this. I looked down. Martin S. Who's Martin? My advisor. The answer sounded simple, but something in her voice suggested it wasn't. I started to hand the card back. She stopped me. No. Keep it. I hesitated. Why would I need this? Her eyes softened as she glanced toward the living room where Rosie was laughing with a cousin. Then she said something I would never forget. Because I promised she'd always be safe. At the time, I assumed she meant emotionally safe. Maybe physically safe. I never imagined she was talking about something much larger. I slipped the card into my pocket and forgot about it. Or at least I thought I had. Now, sitting alone in my kitchen months later, every detail returned with perfect clarity. The running faucet. The serious expression. The warning. The phone number. And most importantly, the word safe. The same word Rosie had used at Christmas dinner. Not money. Not inheritance. Not gifts. Safe. Suddenly, the entire situation felt different. I walked into the living room and opened a storage bin containing keepsakes Ruth had given me over the years. Old recipes. Photographs. Handwritten notes. Holiday cards. Tiny pieces of family history. For nearly 20 minutes, I searched through the contents. Nothing. Then finally, hidden between two recipe cards, I found it. The folded card. Martin's number. My heart began beating faster. Not from fear. From certainty. Because for the first time since Christmas dinner, I felt like I was standing near an answer. Before calling, another memory surfaced. The day of Ruth's funeral. At the time, I had been overwhelmed by grief. Now, looking back, I noticed details I had missed. My father had taken charge of everything. The paperwork. The meetings. The phone calls. The conversations with lawyers. The conversations with financial advisors. Every document that appeared somehow ended up in his hands. Every question I asked somehow received the same answer. Don't worry about it. We've got it handled. There's nothing you need to do. Back then, I believed him. Now I wasn't so sure. I remembered standing in my parents' hallway while a man delivered a thick envelope. The moment it arrived, my father grabbed it. I barely had time to read the label. Within seconds, it disappeared into his office. The door locked behind him. At the time, I thought nothing of it. Now it felt deliberate. I remembered asking several weeks later if I could see copies of the estate documents. My father's reaction had been immediate. No. Not maybe. Not later. Not after everything is finalized. Just no. My mother had backed him up. Camilla had supported him. And somehow they had all managed to make me feel unreasonable for asking. The memory made my stomach tighten. Why had everyone been so defensive? Why had a simple request caused such discomfort? And why had Ruth given me a secret phone number months before she died? The pieces didn't fit together yet, but they were starting to form a picture. That afternoon, my phone rang again. Camilla. For a moment, I considered ignoring it. Instead, I answered, "Hello." Her voice sounded cheerful. Too cheerful. The kind of cheerfulness people use when they're trying to control a conversation before it begins. "Emma," she said, "can we stop being dramatic?" I almost laughed. Rosie had been humiliated. I had been threatened. Yet somehow, I was the dramatic one. "Why did Dad react like that?" I asked. Silence. Just for a second. But it was enough. "What do you mean?" "You know exactly what I mean." Another pause. Then she sighed. "Rosie shouldn't have brought that up." "Brought what up?" "The thing Grandma arranged." The words escaped before she could stop them. My entire body went still. "The thing Grandma arranged." Camilla immediately changed her tone. "Forget it." "No." "What thing?" "Emma, don't start." My pulse quickened. "What are you talking about?" She became defensive. "Dad's handling it." There it was again. "Dad's handling it." The same phrase. The same script. The same attempt to shut down questions. Suddenly, I realized something. Camilla wasn't explaining. She was protecting information. And people only protect information when they're afraid of who might discover it. A few minutes later, the call ended. But the damage was done. Her slip had confirmed my suspicions. Something existed. Something important. Something my family did not want me examining too closely. I looked at Martin's card again. The name suddenly felt heavier. Not mysterious. Necessary. Outside, snow drifted past the kitchen window. Inside, the house was silent. For several minutes, I simply stared at the phone number. Fear tried to stop me. What if I was wrong? What if there was no secret? What if calling created problems that didn't exist? Then I thought about Rosie. I thought about her apologizing for asking a question. I thought about her shrinking into her chair while adults mocked her curiosity. And I remembered Ruth's words. If they ever punish her for asking questions, call him. Not if. When? As though she had expected this moment all along. As though she had seen something years before I was ready to see it. The realization sent a chill through me. Maybe Ruth knew exactly what kind of family dynamics existed beneath the surface. Maybe she had spent years quietly preparing for the day someone finally challenged them. Maybe Christmas dinner wasn't the beginning of the story. Maybe it was the moment a hidden story finally became visible. I took a deep breath, picked up my phone, and typed Martin's number into the screen. For a second, my thumb hovered over the call button. One decision. One phone call. One conversation. That was all that separated confusion from answers. Outside, the world remained quiet. Inside, my heart pounded. Then I pressed call, and everything began to change. Part 4, the phone call that changed everything. The phone rang once, then twice. My thumb tightened around the edge of the device as I listened. For a moment, I wondered if nobody would answer. Maybe the number was outdated. Maybe Martin had retired. Maybe I had spent the entire morning building a theory around a dead end. Then the line clicked. Martin speaking. His voice was calm, professional, the kind of voice that immediately made you feel like the person on the other end didn't waste words. For a second, I forgot what I wanted to say. Then I took a breath. "Hi, my name is Emma." A brief pause. "Emma Harris." Another pause. "I'm Ruth's granddaughter." Silence. Not confused silence. Not surprised silence. Recognition. The kind of silence that appears when someone has been expecting a call. Finally, he spoke. "I was wondering when I would hear from you." The words sent a chill through me. I sat upright in my chair. "You were expecting me." Yes. His answer came immediately. No hesitation. No uncertainty. As though my call had been part of a plan set in motion long ago. For several seconds, I didn't know what to say. Martin broke the silence. Before we continue, he said, are you and your daughter safe right now? The question caught me off guard. Safe? Yes. I glanced toward the hallway, where Rosie was coloring quietly in her room. We're fine. Good. His tone softened slightly. Then take your time and tell me what happened. So I did. I explained Christmas dinner. Rosie's question. My father's reaction. The punishment. The demand for apologies. The threats afterward. The voicemail. The family meeting they tried to force. The messages telling me to learn my place. Martin didn't interrupt. He simply listened. Occasionally, I heard the sound of a pen moving across paper. When I finished, the line remained silent for several moments. Finally, he sighed. Not dramatically. More like someone hearing confirmation of something they already suspected. Ruth was right, he said quietly. My stomach tightened. What do you mean? She believed this might happen. The room suddenly felt colder. I looked toward the window. Snow continued falling outside. Inside, every word felt heavier than the last. She knew they would do this. She believed they might try. Try what? Martin paused carefully. The next sentence changed everything. Control access to information that doesn't belong to them. For a moment, I didn't understand. Then slowly, the meaning settled in. Information about what? The trust. The word landed like a stone. Trust. Suddenly, every strange reaction at Christmas made sense. Every awkward glance. Every attempt to change the subject. Every demand for silence. Every accusation. The room around me seemed to disappear. All of this is about a trust. Partly. Yes. Martin's voice remained measured. Emma, there are details I cannot discuss over the phone. However, I can confirm something. I waited. Your daughter is the primary beneficiary of arrangements Ruth established before her death. I closed my eyes. Rosie. Not my parents. Not Camilla. Rosie. The realization explained far more than I wanted it to. Questions flooded my mind. How much? What exactly did she leave? Why didn't anyone tell me? But Martin wasn't finished. More importantly, he continued. The trust was specifically structured to prevent family members from controlling it. My heart skipped. What does that mean? It means your parents are not trustees. I stared at the kitchen wall. They aren't. No. Camilla. No. Then who is? A professional fiduciary organization. I blinked. For months, my father had acted like he was in charge. For months, everyone had treated him as the authority. For months, I had assumed he was managing everything. And now Martin was calmly telling me he never had that power. Not legally. Not officially. Not at all. Then why does everyone keep saying he's handling it? Martin gave a small laugh. Not an amused laugh. A tired one. Because handling something and controlling something are very different. The statement stayed with me. For years, my father had confused those two ideas. If he organized something, he believed he owned it. If he supervised something, he believed he controlled it. If he participated in something, he believed he deserved authority over it. But according to Martin, this time was different. This time, legal reality didn't match family expectations. Emma, Martin said carefully, I need you to do 3 things. I grabbed a notebook. Okay. First, save every text message. I immediately wrote it down. Second, save every voicemail. Another note. Third, do not attend any family meeting. I stopped writing. What? Do not go. Why? Because they are trying to regain control of the narrative. His words made perfect sense. The meeting wasn't about understanding. It wasn't about reconciliation. It wasn't about concern. It was about restoring authority. The moment I walked into that room, I would be pressured to apologize, explain myself, and accept their version of events. For years, I would have done exactly that. Not anymore. Understood, I said. Good. Then Martin said something that made my pulse quicken. I would like to meet with you in person. When? The first business day after Christmas. My eyes widened. That soon? Yes. Why? Because there are documents you need to see. Documents. Real answers. Not family stories. Not carefully edited explanations. Not manipulative conversations. Actual records. Actual evidence. Actual truth. For the first time since Christmas dinner, I felt something unexpected. Relief. Not complete relief, but enough to breathe. Enough to think clearly. Enough to realize I wasn't imagining things. There really was something hidden beneath the surface. And Ruth had known it. Maybe that was why she gave me Martin's number. Maybe she knew nobody would listen until events forced them to. Maybe she understood the family better than anyone else. The conversation lasted another 20 minutes. Most of it involved practical instructions. Bring identification. Bring Rosie's birth certificate. Bring any messages from family members. Document everything. Stay calm. Don't engage in arguments. When the call finally ended, I remained seated at the kitchen table. The house was quiet. The same house. The same chair. The same snow outside. Yet everything felt different. For months, I had believed I was standing outside a locked door. Now I had discovered the key existed all along. Across the hallway, Rosie laughed at something she was drawing. The sound made me smile. She had no idea what was happening. No idea her question had exposed secrets adults were desperately trying to protect. No idea that one simple sentence had rattled an entire system. She was just a child. A curious child. A brave child. And somehow that bravery had done what years of silence never could. It had forced the truth into the open. I stood up and walked to the closet where I kept important records. One by one, I gathered documents. My identification. Rosie's birth certificate. School records. Medical records. Anything that might be useful. Then I placed everything neatly into a folder. Not because I was preparing for a fight. Because I was preparing for facts. There was a difference. Outside, the snow finally began to slow. Inside, a different storm was just beginning. And somewhere across town, my parents still believed they were in control. They had no idea that one phone call had already changed the game. The truth was moving now. Quietly. Legally. Relentlessly. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid to follow it wherever it led. Part 5. The file they never wanted me to see. The first business day after Christmas arrived cold and gray. By 7 in the morning, I was already awake. I barely slept the night before. Every time I closed my eyes, questions returned. What exactly had Ruth created? Why had my parents reacted so strongly? Why had Martin sounded so certain? And most importantly, what had everyone been trying so hard to keep hidden? Rosie sat at the kitchen table eating cereal while humming to herself. For the first time in days, she seemed relaxed. The tension that followed us home from Christmas dinner had started fading. Children are resilient, but only when they feel safe. I brushed her hair, packed her backpack, and drove her to her winter program. As she climbed out of the car, she turned back. "Will you be here when I get home?" The question was simple, but after everything that had happened, it carried extra weight. I smiled. "Of course." She grinned and ran toward the building. I watched until she disappeared inside. Then I drove downtown. The city streets were wet with melting snow. Traffic moved slowly. People hurried along sidewalks carrying coffee cups and briefcases. Everything looked normal. Meanwhile, my stomach felt like it contained a swarm of bees. For weeks, maybe months, I had sensed something wasn't right. Today, I was finally going to find out if those instincts were real. Martin's office occupied the third floor of a modest brick building. Nothing flashy. No giant sign. No marble lobby. Just a professional office that looked more interested in doing work than impressing visitors. Inside, the receptionist greeted me politely. A few minutes later, Martin appeared. He looked exactly how I imagined a trusted advisor would look. Calm. Organized. Unshakable. He shook my hand firmly. "Thank you for coming. Thank you for meeting me." Without wasting time, he led me into a conference room. A large folder rested on the table. The moment I saw it, my pulse quickened. Because written across the tab was a name. ROSLEHARIS Trust. My daughter's name. Not my father's. Not Camilla's. Not mine. Rosie's. Martin noticed my expression. "Take a seat." I sat. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then he opened the folder. "Before we begin," he said, "I want you to understand something." I nodded. "Everything I'm showing you today was created legally, reviewed professionally, and designed specifically according to Ruth's instructions." The seriousness in his voice immediately got my attention. This wasn't accidental. This wasn't vague. And this wasn't informal. I swallowed. "Okay." He slid the first document across the table. The title page alone made my heart race. Trust Agreement. Beneficiary, Rosalie Harris. I stared at the words. For years, my family had acted like Ruth's affairs belonged to them. Now the first official document in front of me said otherwise. Rosie is the beneficiary. Martin nodded. Yes. My mind immediately jumped to money. But Martin seemed to anticipate that. "Before you focus on numbers," he said, "focus on purpose." He pointed to a section near the beginning. I read slowly. The trust existed to provide security, education, housing support, and long-term protection for the beneficiary. Protection. There was that word again. Not wealth. Not inheritance. Protection. Suddenly, I remembered Christmas dinner. Rosie hadn't asked about money. She had asked about the thing that would keep her safe. Exactly the way Ruth had described it. My throat tightened. "She knew," I whispered. Martin nodded. She absolutely knew. For a moment, emotion threatened to overwhelm me. Not because of the trust itself, because of what it represented. Ruth had seen something. Something serious enough to make plans years in advance. Something serious enough to require legal safeguards. Something serious enough to protect a child from future interference. Martin carefully turned another page. This section identifies authority. He handed me a printed chart. The structure was simple. Beneficiary, Rosie. Legal parent, Emma. Trustee, independent professional fiduciary organization. No family members listed. No parental control. No sibling authority. No shared management. Nothing. I stared at the page. That's it. Yes. My father isn't involved. No. My mother. No. Camilla. No. The answer remained the same every time. No. 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 Months of family assumptions collapsed in seconds. Everything my parents implied. Everything Camilla suggested. Everything they wanted me to believe. None of it matched reality. Then Martin reached for another folder. This one looked thinner, more specific. His expression changed slightly. Not dramatic, but serious. This, he said carefully, is the part Ruth specifically instructed me to preserve. A strange feeling settled in my chest. What is it? Correspondence. I frowned. Correspondence. Emails. The word immediately made me nervous. Martin opened the packet and placed several printed pages on the table. At first, I didn't understand what I was seeing. Then I noticed names. My father's name. Camilla's name. Dates. Subject lines. Professional language. The first email appeared harmless. A request for information. The second was more detailed. The third made my stomach drop. I read it twice. Then a third time. Because I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Months before Christmas, my father had contacted parties connected to the trust. Not as a concerned grandfather. Not as family. As someone seeking influence. The wording was polite. Professional. Carefully written. But the goal was obvious. He wanted involvement. Authority. Access. Control. I looked up. What is this? Martin folded his hands. An attempt. An attempt at what? Positioning. The answer felt chilling. I continued reading. Another email appeared. This one from Camilla. Her tone sounded cheerful. Helpful. Supportive. Yet beneath the friendly language sat the same objective. She offered herself as someone capable of helping manage matters involving Rosie. Manage. The word practically glowed on the page. Neither of them used the word control. People rarely do. Instead, they use softer words. Guide. Assist. Manage. Support. But the destination remains the same. Power. I looked at Martin. They were planning something. Yes. How long? Several months. My pulse hammered. Before Christmas. Yes. I leaned back in my chair. Suddenly, everything made sense. The reaction at dinner. The panic. The attempts to silence Rosie. The insistence that she apologize. The demand that I return. None of it had been about manners. It had been about fear. Rosie's question had touched a subject they desperately wanted buried. Because a child asking questions creates attention. Attention creates curiosity. And curiosity creates problems for people trying to control information. I lowered my eyes to the emails again. The words blurred together. Not because I couldn't read them. Because I finally understood them. These weren't random conversations. They were strategy. Months of strategy. Careful planning. Quiet maneuvering. Private discussions happening while family dinners continued as normal. While birthdays were celebrated. While holidays came and went. While everyone smiled for photographs. Behind the scenes, something entirely different had been unfolding. And Ruth had seen it coming. That realization shook me more than anything else. Not because my family wanted influence, but because Ruth anticipated it. She knew enough to prepare defenses before she was even gone. Martin slid another document forward. This was drafted shortly before Christmas. I looked down. The heading immediately caught my attention. Proposed petition. My heart sank. What is this? A draft. For what? Potential guardianship of financial interests. I stared. The room suddenly felt smaller. What does that mean? It means someone was exploring ways to gain legal authority over trust-related matters. The words landed heavily. I looked back at the names attached to the paperwork. My father, Camilla, the same people who had punished a child for asking questions, the same people demanding apologies, the same people insisting I didn't need information. Now everything fit together. Not perfectly, but enough. Enough to reveal the shape of the truth. And that truth was simple. Christmas dinner hadn't started the conflict. It had exposed it. Rosie's question wasn't the problem. Rosie's question had interrupted a plan. And for the first time since this nightmare began, I wasn't confused anymore. I wasn't guessing. I wasn't imagining things. I was reading facts. Real documents. Real dates. Real intentions. Across the table, Martin watched quietly. Finally, he spoke. Do you understand now why Ruth told you to call? I looked at the file. Then at the trust. Then at the emails. And finally at the name printed across the top of every document. Rosalie Harris. My daughter. The child everyone expected to stay quiet. The child they tried to shame. The child whose simple question had cracked open a secret years in the making. Slowly, I nodded. Yes. For the first time, I understood everything. And I had a feeling the people who spent years controlling the story were about to discover something they never expected. The truth had finally found its voice. And this time, it wasn't apologizing. Part 6, the moment everything started falling apart. For several minutes after reading the documents, I simply sat there. The conference room was quiet. Outside the large window, people hurried along the sidewalk carrying coffee cups and briefcases, completely unaware that my entire understanding of my family had just changed. I looked down at the stack of papers again. The trust documents, the emails, the draft petition, the timelines. Every page confirmed the same thing. I hadn't imagined any of it. For years, I had been told I was too sensitive, too suspicious, too emotional, too difficult. But facts don't care about family narratives. Facts don't change because someone raises their voice. Facts don't disappear because people insist you stop asking questions. And the facts sitting in front of me told a very different story than the one my parents had spent years promoting. Martin allowed me a few moments to process everything before speaking again. When he finally did, his voice remained calm and professional. There's one more thing we need to discuss. I looked up. What is it? Protection. The word immediately caught my attention. Protection from what? Interference. I frowned. Martin folded his hands on the table. Emma, people who lose access to control don't always accept it quietly. A chill moved through me. Because I already knew he was right. The phone calls. The messages. The threats disguised as concern. Everything that happened after Christmas dinner pointed in the same direction. My parents weren't upset because of manners. They were upset because authority had slipped from their hands. And people who build their identity around control rarely surrender it willingly. Martin opened another folder. Inside were several prepared forms. Today we're going to establish clear communication restrictions. I blinked. What does that mean? It means nobody, except authorized individuals, receives information about the trust. He slid a document toward me. I read carefully. The language was straightforward. Only verified parties would be allowed access to information. Only approved individuals could discuss distributions, management, or trust matters. Anyone else would be denied. No exceptions. My eyes widened. My parents won't be able to call and ask questions. No. Camilla. No. Anyone else. Not unless they're legally authorized. For the first time in days, I felt something close to relief. Not victory. Not satisfaction. Just relief. Because boundaries were finally being placed, where boundaries should have existed all along. Martin continued. We're also documenting the events from Christmas. I nodded. I saved the texts. Good. The voicemails too. Excellent. He pulled out a legal pad. Let's create a timeline. For the next hour, we reconstructed everything. The dinner conversation. Rosie's question. My father's reaction. The punishment. The order to eat separately. The threats afterward. The demand for apologies. The voicemail about the family meeting. Every detail. Every message. Every interaction. Nothing dramatic. Nothing exaggerated. Just facts. Date. Time. Event. Evidence. The simplicity made it powerful. Because truth doesn't need decoration. When we finished, Martin attached copies of screenshots and transcripts. Then he prepared a formal notice. I watched him type. Every keystroke felt significant. The letter identified me as Rosie's legal parent. It clarified that all communications regarding the trust must occur through proper channels. It warned against attempts to interfere with trust administration. And it formally documented concerns about efforts to pressure a minor beneficiary. The language wasn't emotional. It wasn't angry. It was professional, which somehow made it far more effective. When Martin finished, he printed the document and handed it to me. Read it. I did. Every line was accurate. Every statement supported by evidence. Nothing exaggerated. Nothing speculative. Just reality. I signed where required. Martin scanned the pages and uploaded them immediately. Then he picked up the phone. Now, he said, we notify the trustee. My pulse quickened. The call connected within minutes. A representative answered. Professional. Courteous. Efficient. Martin introduced himself and explained the situation. Then he summarized the concerns. Not family drama. Not emotional conflict. Documented interference. Attempts to control information. Pressure directed toward a minor beneficiary. The representative listened carefully, then responded without hesitation. We'll place an immediate restriction flag on the account. Martin nodded. Thank you. No unauthorized disclosures will be permitted. Excellent. And all inquiries will be documented. The call ended. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then Martin leaned back slightly. That's done. I stared at him. That's it. That's it. The simplicity surprised me. Months of manipulation. Years of family dynamics. And the solution wasn't a screaming argument. It wasn't a dramatic confrontation. It was paperwork, documentation, professional oversight, boundaries. For the first time, I understood why my parents seemed so nervous about official processes. Because official processes don't care who dominates the dinner table. They care about facts. And facts are difficult to bully. When our meeting finally ended, Martin handed me a thick folder containing copies of everything. Keep this somewhere safe. I will. Don't give originals to anyone. I won't. Don't let anyone convince you they need to hold these documents. I nodded. That warning felt strangely specific, almost as if he had seen situations like this before. Probably because he had. As I stood to leave, Martin offered one final piece of advice. Expect pushback. I paused. How much? He gave a small smile. More than you think. Unfortunately, he was right. The pushback began faster than either of us expected. By the time I reached my car, I already had 2 missed calls from my mother, 3 from my father, and 1 from Camilla. I ignored them all. When I arrived home, another voicemail appeared. This time it was my mother. Her voice sounded strained. Panicked. "Emma, call me immediately." A second voicemail arrived 20 minutes later. This one sounded angrier. "Why is the trustee refusing to answer our questions?" I froze, then slowly smiled. Because that question revealed everything. The restrictions were already working. They had called. They had been denied. And suddenly, they realized they weren't in charge. Not legally. Not financially. Not officially. A few hours later, my father's voicemail arrived. Unlike my mother, he didn't sound emotional. He sounded furious. "What did you do?" The question echoed through the speaker. Not "how are you?" Not "can we talk?" Not "what's happening?" Just one demand. "What did you do?" I listened twice, then saved the recording. Exactly as Martin instructed. The next day things escalated. Text messages arrived every few hours. Some attempted guilt. Some attempted intimidation. Some attempted negotiation. One message claimed I was tearing the family apart. Another accused me of overreacting. A third insisted everything had been a misunderstanding. Yet none of them addressed the actual issue. Not one. Nobody apologized to Rosie. Nobody acknowledged the humiliation. Nobody admitted what happened at Christmas dinner was wrong. Instead, they focused on one thing: access, information, control. The more they contacted me, the clearer it became. They weren't worried about relationships. They were worried about losing influence. And influence was disappearing quickly. By the 4th day, my mother's messages had shifted dramatically. The confidence was gone. The certainty had vanished. What remained was desperation. "Please call us. We need to discuss this. There's been a misunderstanding. Let's work this out." I read every message carefully, then saved every one. Because documentation had become my strongest ally. Late that evening, another voicemail arrived. This time from Camilla. Her voice sounded different than usual. Less confident. Less polished. Almost nervous. "Emma," she said, "you're making this bigger than it needs to be." I stared at the phone. Because that's what people say when consequences finally arrive. Not when the behavior happens. When accountability begins. For years, my family controlled the narrative. For years, they decided who was right and who was wrong. For years, they relied on silence. Now the silence was over. And somewhere across town, they were beginning to realize something terrifying. The doors they thought belonged to them had never belonged to them at all. Those doors were closing, one by one. And no amount of anger could force them back open. The unraveling had started. Quietly. Legally. Irreversibly. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't standing in the middle of the storm. I was standing outside it, watching the truth do what truth eventually does. Reveal everything. Part 7, their most desperate move. The week after my meeting with Martin should have felt peaceful. Instead, it felt like the calm that comes right before a storm. Every morning I woke up expecting another voicemail, another text message, another attempt to pull me back into the same cycle I had spent years trying to survive. And every morning, my phone delivered exactly that. My mother alternated between guilt and outrage. One day she insisted she only wanted to heal the family. The next day she accused me of destroying it. My father stayed more direct. His messages were short, cold, demanding. "Call me. We need to talk." Fix this. As if I had broken something that belonged to him. As if setting boundaries was a mistake that required correction. As if protecting my daughter needed his approval. But the more messages arrived, the less power they seemed to have. For the first time in my life, I wasn't rushing to explain myself. I wasn't defending every decision. I wasn't trying to convince people to understand me. I was simply documenting everything. And that difference changed everything. Meanwhile, Rosie was slowly becoming herself again. The anxious apologies had started fading. The hesitation before speaking had begun disappearing. One afternoon, she spilled juice on the kitchen floor. The old Rosie would have panicked. The old Rosie would have immediately started apologizing. This time she simply looked down, grabbed a towel and said, "Oops." Then she cleaned it up. No tears. No fear. No shame. I stood there watching and felt something loosen inside my chest. That single moment told me more than any legal document ever could. Children flourish when they don't have to earn safety. And safety was exactly what I intended to protect. Unfortunately, my family had other plans. 4 days later, the situation escalated dramatically. It happened on a Wednesday morning. I was helping Rosie finish breakfast when the doorbell rang. At first, I assumed it was a package delivery. Maybe something delayed by the holidays. But when I opened the door, a man stood there holding a thick envelope. He wore a dark coat and carried a clipboard. My stomach tightened immediately. Emma Harris. Yes. You've been served. The words hit harder than I expected. Not because I was surprised. Because somehow seeing the paperwork made everything real. I signed the acknowledgement form, closed the door, and stared at the envelope. For several seconds, I didn't move. Rosie looked up from the table. "Who's that?" I forced a smile. "Just paperwork." Technically, it wasn't a lie. After taking Rosie to her winter program, I sat at my kitchen table and opened the packet. The first page made my pulse jump. Petition for emergency appointment. I kept reading. By the second page, I felt anger replacing shock. By the third page, I couldn't believe what I was seeing. The petition described me as unstable, emotional, erratic, uncooperative. It claimed I was making irrational decisions. It implied I was isolating Rosie from family support. And then came the real purpose. The request for authority over trust-related matters. There it was, buried beneath layers of concern and carefully chosen language. The same goal Martin had warned me about. Control. Not custody. Not love. Not safety. Control. And the name attached to the request made my stomach twist. Camilla. My sister. The woman who barely attended Rosie's school events. The woman who rarely called. The woman who knew almost nothing about my daughter's daily life. Now she was presenting herself as the stable alternative. The responsible one. The solution. I read every page carefully. Then I called Martin. He answered immediately. Tell me they didn't actually file it. They filed it. Silence. Then a long exhale. Email it to me. I scanned every page and sent it. Less than 20 minutes later, he called back. His tone remained calm. But I could hear frustration beneath it. This is weaker than I expected. I blinked. Weaker. Yes. How? Because accusations aren't evidence. The statement instantly steadied me. Martin continued. Look at what's missing. I flipped through the pages again. Medical reports. None. Police reports. None. School concerns. None. Witness statements. None. Anything showing actual danger. Nothing. Just opinions, speculation, assumptions. The entire petition relied on one argument. Emma is difficult. Martin laughed softly. Being difficult isn't a legal emergency. For the first time all day, I smiled. Still, a court hearing was scheduled, which meant I needed to prepare. Over the next several days, Martin helped me organize everything. Every text message, every voicemail, every screenshot, every timeline entry, every interaction. He placed everything into a binder. Christmas dinner, threats, family meeting, trust communications, documentation. The binder grew thicker every day. By the time the hearing arrived, it looked less like a family dispute and more like a detailed record of manipulation. The courthouse stood cold and gray beneath a cloudy sky. As I walked through the entrance, my stomach churned. Not from fear, from anticipation. Because today, for the first time, the story would be examined by someone who wasn't part of my family system. Someone who didn't care about old roles. Someone who wasn't impressed by authority. Someone whose job was simply to evaluate facts. And facts were finally on my side. Inside the courtroom, I immediately spotted my family. My mother sat clutching tissues. My father wore his serious expression, the one he used whenever he wanted to appear important. Camilla sat between them, wearing a soft beige sweater that practically screamed harmless. If I hadn't known better, I might have believed they were concerned relatives. But I did know better. And so did Martin. He sat quietly several rows behind me. Not leading. Not directing. Simply present. A reminder that I wasn't alone. When the hearing began, the judge reviewed the petition. Her expression remained neutral. Professional. Unimpressed. Exactly what I hoped for. Finally, she looked up. Emergency petitions require emergency circumstances. The room became silent. Camilla stood first. Your Honor, we're concerned about Rosie's well-being. The judge nodded. Specifically, Camilla hesitated, then launched into a carefully prepared speech about family relationships, communication problems, and emotional stability. It sounded convincing, until the judge started asking questions. Has the child been harmed? No. Has the child been neglected? No. Any medical concerns? No. School concerns? No. Each answer weakened the petition further. Then the judge turned toward me. Ms. Harris. I stood. My hands felt steady. Steadier than I expected. I explained Christmas dinner. Rosie's question. The punishment. The threats. The demands. The attempted family meeting. Then I handed over copies of messages and voicemails. The courtroom remained silent as the judge reviewed them. Several minutes passed. Finally, she reached one particular message. My father's. You are not welcome in this family. The judge read it twice. Then she looked up. Who sent this? My father. She nodded slowly. Then reviewed another message. And another. And another. The longer she read, the more the atmosphere shifted. Because written words are difficult to explain away, especially when they're your own. Eventually, the judge set the papers down. Then she asked a question that changed everything. Why is an emergency appointment necessary when a professional trustee already exists? Silence. Complete silence. Camilla froze. My mother looked down. My father shifted in his seat. Nobody answered immediately. Because there wasn't a good answer. The judge waited. Finally, Camilla spoke. We just thought. The judge interrupted. You thought what? Another silence. The judge's expression hardened slightly. Not angry. Just clear. This court does not exist to resolve family power struggles. The words landed like a hammer. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. And for the first time, I saw uncertainty on my father's face. Real uncertainty. The kind that appears when authority stops working. 10 minutes later, the ruling came. Petition denied. Just like that. No dramatic speech. No shouting. No courtroom theatrics. Simply a decision based on facts. The judge also issued additional guidance. Future petitions would require substantial evidence. Interference with existing trust administration would not be tolerated. And parental authority remained fully intact. In other words, the door slammed shut. Legally. Completely. As people began leaving the courtroom, my family looked stunned. Not devastated. Not emotional. Confused. Because for perhaps the first time in their lives, the system had refused to reward control. Outside the courthouse, snow drifted lightly through the air. I stood at the top of the steps and took a long breath. The fight wasn't over. I knew that. People who spend years controlling others rarely quit after one loss. But something important had happened. The illusion had cracked. A judge had looked at the facts and seen exactly what this was. Not concern. Not protection. Not love. Control. And control had just suffered its first major defeat. As I walked toward my car, my phone buzzed. A new message arrived. From my mother. 3 words. This isn't over. I stared at the screen for several seconds. Then I locked the phone. Because for the first time, I understood something my family never expected me to learn. The moment people lose control isn't when they become dangerous. It's when they become desperate. And desperation was exactly what I had just witnessed in court. Part 8, when control finally breaks. After the court hearing, I expected silence. Instead, I got noise. Not direct confrontation at first, something more subtle. The kind of pressure that spreads through messages, calls, and half-truths told to relatives who only hear one side of the story. By the next morning, my phone was already filling up again. But the tone had changed. My mother no longer sounded angry. She sounded strategic. We need to talk privately. This is getting out of hand. You're misunderstanding everything. My father stayed sharper. You embarrassed us in court. You will regret this. Camilla, however, was the most surprising. Her message arrived later in the day. Short. Carefully worded. We should all just move forward. But none of them explained what forward meant. Because forward still meant control. Just in a softer tone. I didn't respond. Not because I had nothing to say, but because I finally understood something important. Responding was part of the system they relied on. Every reply became fuel. Every explanation became a debate. Every emotion became leverage. So I stayed quiet and documented everything. Meanwhile, something unexpected started happening. Other relatives began contacting me. Not aggressively. Curiously. Confused messages started arriving from cousins and extended family. Your mom says you cut them off. What's going on? She said you're keeping Rosie away from everyone. At first, I tried to correct it. Then I stopped. Because I realized something simple. This wasn't a conversation anymore. It was a narrative war. And whoever spoke first usually controlled the story. My parents had already spoken first. But now, cracks were forming. One cousin messaged privately. I don't understand. They said you were unstable, but that doesn't sound like you. Another wrote, why would they go to court if there was no evidence? I didn't push. I didn't persuade. I just answered with facts when necessary. Short. Calm. Documented. The same approach Martin taught me. Meanwhile, Rosie was changing in ways I could see clearly every day. The fear was gone. Not completely erased, but fading. She started asking questions again. Small ones. Normal ones. Why is the sky pink at sunset? Why do people get tired? Why do adults argue so much? And this time, she didn't pause afterward. She didn't look for approval. She didn't apologize for curiosity. She was becoming a child again. Not a careful version of one. A real one. One afternoon, while she was drawing at the kitchen table, she looked up and said something that stayed with me. "Mom, I don't think I'm in trouble anymore." I paused. "What makes you say that?" She shrugged. "Because nobody is telling me sorry for asking things." That moment hit harder than the court hearing. Because it proved something no legal document ever could. She had internalized safety. Not fear. Safety. And that was the real victory. But the outside world wasn't finished reacting. 2 days later, my mother escalated again. This time through the family group chat. A long message appeared. Carefully written. Public. Performative. Emma has chosen to separate herself from this family during a difficult time. We are saddened by her refusal to accept help. We still love Rosie and hope she returns to us one day. Attached were photos. Old ones. Carefully selected moments, designed to paint them as warm, loving grandparents. Then my father added his own message. Some people cannot be reasoned with. And then Camilla. We did everything we could. It was structured. Intentional. A coordinated narrative. Not spontaneous emotion. Damage control. But something unexpected happened next. Someone replied. Then another. Then another. A cousin asked. "Wait, didn't the court deny your petition?" Another wrote. "I thought there was no evidence." The narrative didn't collapse immediately. But it started to wobble. Because once facts enter the conversation, stories become harder to maintain. And then I made my move. Not emotional. Not dramatic. Just factual. I uploaded a single document into the chat. The trust summary. The portion that confirmed one thing clearly. Rosie was the sole beneficiary. Not my parents. Not Camilla. Not extended family. Just Rosie. And I added one line beneath it. This is public legal information, already reviewed by the court. Then I stopped. No explanation. No argument. No emotion. Just truth. The effect was immediate. Confusion. Questions. Silence. Then messages started shifting. Wait, I didn't know that. Why did they say they were in charge? That's not what I was told. The story was breaking apart in real time. Not because I forced it, but because it was never stable to begin with. Later that night, my father called. I didn't answer. He called again. Then again. Finally, a voicemail. His voice was different now. Not commanding. Not controlling. Tighter. Less certain. "This needs to stop," he said. But the power behind those words was gone. Because stop only works when you still control the system. And he didn't. The next morning, I received something unexpected. A message from Martin. They've been advised to cease direct contact regarding the trust. That was it. No drama. No explanation. Just confirmation. The system had fully locked them out. For the first time since Christmas, I felt something steady settle inside me. Not victory. Not celebration. Just closure in one area of chaos. But the final shift didn't come from court. Or documents. Or legal letters. It came quietly. One evening, Rosie sat beside me on the couch and asked, "Do we have to go back to Grandpa's house again?" I thought for a moment before answering. "No." She nodded. "Good." Then she leaned her head against my shoulder and added something small, almost casual. "I like our house better." That was it. No trauma language. No fear. No confusion. Just preference. A child choosing peace without realizing how rare that choice used to be. Later that night, I stood in the kitchen alone. The house was quiet. Normal quiet. Not the kind filled with tension. And I realized something simple. This whole situation had never really been about money. Or inheritance. Or legal documents. It had been about control. Who gets to define reality? Who gets to decide what is true? Who gets to decide what a child is allowed to ask? And for years, my family had answered that question for everyone. Until one child asked something they couldn't silence. And everything changed. Outside, the night was still. Inside, for the first time in a long time, so was I. Not because everything was perfect, but because the most important line had finally been drawn. And this time it held.